Alright, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. We do educational videos on this channel, mainly trying to expose you to great theories of everything, ancient and modern, usually pretty obscure, people who spent their whole, excuse me, people who spent their whole life working on something and never really got the credit for it. Never really made any money out of it, or not much, and left behind a great treasure trove of information and research, and somehow I've stumbled across these things over the course of the last 30 plus years, and I'm just trying to share these things out. And in a lot of cases, these are difficult theories, theories of everything, all-encompassing theories, grand unified theories, cosmologies, and I try to let the authors of these speak for themselves to as much as possible. Not only because I think that's important, but also I'm not quite worthy of trying to paraphrase a lot of this stuff. And so today is the 28th video that we've done on Daniel Ingram in his book called Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha. And this is kind of the new unit that we've started called the Reciprocal Church. We're going to try to shed light on things that might be able to fill in a lot of the gaps that are endemic to Western religion, especially once you go deep into it, down the rabbit hole, and recognize the psyops involved and so on. And we're also going to shed light on those psyops. But I think I'm trying to prepare that stuff right now, and it's very time consuming. And so we're going to get into this Buddhism, which is not a religion, I would say, but really it's a method, a technology that you can use to figure stuff out and end suffering for yourself or your not self. Daniel Ingram has spent a lot of time in monasteries all over the world and has cobbled together this information painstakingly. And so he's putting it on a silver platter for you as a Westerner. Stuff that you would never, ever get to taste otherwise, most likely. Not without traveling thousands of miles. And we're going to try to bring this to you here. I will intersperse with some commentary, but not very much. Okay, now we're in chapter 22 or 23, and it is on harnessing the energy of the defilements. So especially the emotions. He's talking about negative feelings and emotions and how they can give you a lot of energy if you know how to harness them. And he got up to a point where he's about to introduce a method here. And so we're going to start right here. Try this little exercise the next time a strong and seemingly useless, scary, dangerous, embarrassing, or unskillful emotion arises. And he lists, wow, about 12 things that you're supposed to do. Okay. He does present a method. I never said it was easy to follow the method. You've got to, you know, read and reread or watch my videos over and over again. Okay, so try this little exercise the next time a strong and seemingly useless, scary, dangerous, embarrassing, or unskillful emotion arises. Stabilize precisely on the patterns of sensations that make it up, and perhaps even allow these to become stronger. This helps you to examine them more clearly. You might do this practice with eyes open if the feelings are very strong and you wish to add the perspective that space brings to help maintain a more open perspective. Next, find where these are in the body and discern as clearly as possible what sorts of images and storylines are associated with these physical sensations. Then be absolutely clear about the full magnitude of the suffering in these, how long each lasts, and that these sensations are observed and not particularly in our control. Find the compassion in it. Take a minute or two, or no more, to reflect on why this pattern of sensations seems to be of some use, even though it may not seem useful in its current form. Also, ask yourself, is there a wish for yourself or others to be happy in these sensations? Is there a wish for the world to be a better place? Is there a wish for someone to understand something important? Is there a wish for things to be better than they are? Is there a wish to find pleasure, tranquility, or the end of suffering? Sit with these questions, with the sensations that make them up, allowing them to be strong enough for you to see what is going on, but not so strong that you become completely overwhelmed by them. Notice that fear has in it the desire to protect us or those we care for. Anger wants to right a perceived wrong, wants us or the world to be happy and work well, or for justice to be done. Frustration comes from the caring sensations of anger being thwarted. Desire is rooted in the wish to be happy. Judgment comes from the wish for things to conform to high standards. Sadness comes from the sense of how good things could be and from the loss of something cherished. I could go on like this for a whole book, so don't turn these into dogma. Each has much more nuance that you can explore. Actively reflecting along these lines, sit with this compassionate wish, acknowledge it, and feel the compassionate aspect of it. Allow the actual sensations that seem to make up the feeling of wanting itself to be directly understood as and where they are. Remember that this same quality of compassion is in all beings, in all their unskillful and confused attempts both to find happiness and to put an end to their suffering. Sit for a while with this reflection as it relates directly to your experience. Then, examine the mental sensations related to the object that you either wish to have attraction, wish to get away from, aversion, or wish to ignore, ignorance. Examine realistically if this will fundamentally help yourself and others, and if these changes are within your power to bring about. If so, Then plan and act with as much compassion and kindness as possible. Remember that all the rest of the suffering of that emotional pattern is created by your mind and its confusion, and vow to channel its force into developing morality, concentration, and wisdom. Reflection on the fact that the emotions have unskillful components as well as skillful ones can give us a more realistic relationship to our hearts, minds, and bodies. This sort of reflection can allow us to grow in wisdom and kindness without blindly shutting ourselves down or chaining ourselves to a wall. From a certain point of view, we are all doing our best all the time, and the problem is just that we do not see clearly enough. The basic spirit embodied in this set of instructions about how to see the skillful and unskillful elements in all emotions will come up a few times later in more advanced sections, so it is worth paying attention to it here. These instructions are worth revisiting if you find yourself in some of the difficult meditation stages described later. If we are going to take on feelings at a more formal vipassana level, we might try identifying a feeling we wish to clarify and get to know more skillfully. We can then acknowledge the transient sensations that make up the image of the object of the feeling and notice the oscillation between the sensations that make up our mental image of that object and the tender-hearted center of the feeling. We often imagine that if we acknowledge our own tender-hearted center, we will somehow jinx ourselves to become more susceptible to emotional injury. However, the opposite is true, as that sort of investigation can help reveal a more healthy and clear relationship to our feeling life. This can be taken as a formal practice when difficult feelings arise, or even with ordinary feelings across the wide range of feelings by those who like to take this type of practice deep. There is a teaching from Buddhist Tantra related to the 5 Dhyani Buddhas, or 5 archetypal Buddha families, that does a good job of dealing with the wide world of emotions and their helpful and less helpful aspects. There's also a teaching called the 6 Realms that can help as well. Both teachings are too rich and deep to do them justice here. If you are interested in these fine teachings, you might check out a survey. Check out Journey Without God, particularly Chapter 9, which is one of the most reread chapters of any of my Dharma books. Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism by Chogyam Trungpa, and also Transcending Madness by Trungpa as well, Rinpoche, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. Note that the fundamental rule when applying emotion-derived effort in practice is to put it into practice rather than thoughts about practice, thoughts about some goal that seems far off, thoughts about success or failure, thoughts about our strengths or weaknesses, or even thoughts about putting effort into practice. These traps are all too common. Blindly waste the vast power inherent in our emotional life and perpetuate rather than reduce difficulties. Some of us will have to learn the hard way, and unfortunately, some will never learn at all. I remember some time ago when I realized that something I thought I had thoroughly understood was only partially understood. I was extremely unhappy about this and decided to put the fullness of this compassionate rage into relentless, focused investigation of the 3 characteristics during whatever periods of time I could find during the day to do so. It was only 2 months later that I came to understand what I wished to. And I was grateful for the power of the emotional life and what it can lend to practice. Remember, there is love and wisdom mixed into even our worst emotions. If that is what we have to work with, let's use it wisely. Some may then say, that is not right motivation. You cannot proceed without right motivation. Well, aside from the fact that this simply isn't true, such people trap themselves in a catch-22. To attain this very pure motivation, to use dangerously misleading language, we must understand what it is that we want to use this pure motivation to understand. Thus, were we unable to proceed based upon our somewhat diluted motivations, awakening would be impossible. Luckily, awakening is possible, and the only tool we have is practice, based upon necessarily semi-diluted motivations. I am extremely grateful that this seems to be enough if we are willing to use what we do have rather than fantasizing about some idealized us that does not exist. Without greed, rage, grandiosity, vanity, frustration, jealousy, arrogance, competitiveness, insecurity, fear, and a host of other delusions, we would hardly budge. We wouldn't pick up Dharma books. We wouldn't go on retreats. We wouldn't deal with our stuff. And we wouldn't care at all. But we do care, and so we forge on. Thank the metaphorical God for the power of our emotions and the pain the dark ones cause. They are the gasoline that fuels us on the road to understanding. Okay, that's the end of that chapter. This chapter 23 is called Right Thought and Augean Stables. Augean spelled Augean. There is a lot of emphasis on right thought and suppressing or uprooting the mental defilements in Buddhism, as well as training in morality, right speech, right action, and so on. As these are agendas for what happens in our ordinary reality, they are aspects of training in morality. This practice of being mindful of our thoughts and actions is helpful only when not distorted and misunderstood. When this becomes the predominant thrust of our practice, involving images of self-perfection that deny basic realities of human existence and the inevitable dark sides of our minds and lives, trouble is guaranteed. The Buddha did speak at length about restraining negative emotions and actions. He was making a very important point, but he didn't stop there, since he also advocated that people go on to cultivate concentration and then insight, to temporarily quiet and eventually overcome the fundamental delusions that drive our noisy minds. The same point would apply to psychotherapy. It can be useful, and I personally have benefited from it. But to access the end of fundamental suffering, we must go much deeper. Sutra 20, in the middle-length discourses of the Buddha, is called The Removal of Distracting Thoughts. In it, the Buddha admonishes his followers to deal with unskillful, evil, unwholesome, or useless thoughts in the following ways. If the meditator is paying attention to something that is causing these unskillful thoughts, then he or she should give attention to something wholesome that does not produce unskillful thoughts. If this fails, then the meditator should reflect on the danger in those unskillful thoughts and thus try to condition him or herself not to think such thoughts in this way. If this fails, then the meditator should try to ignore those thoughts and not give them any attention. If this fails, he or she should give attention to quieting the mind and to stilling these thoughts. If this fails, the meditator should bear down with full will and crush the mind with mind, forcing the thoughts to stop with unremitting and unrestrained effort. I'll add to that the top secret procedure that Ra Men talks about in Madhunater, which is to contract your lower dantian, which is just like an inch below your navel, half an inch below your navel. There's a valve there, and either your mind is contracted or your navel is contracted. It's one or the other, and so you can shut down your thinking, at least your verbal thinking, which is what takes you out of the meditation in the first place. You can, if you contract and really keep contracted that lower dantian, just below the navel, and you'll find that you won't be able to formulate verbal thinking. You'll still, be subject to visual thinking and nonverbal thinking, but those are much easier to bounce back from and get back into your meditation. The Buddha also recommended the formal concentration practices called the Brahma Viharas and or divine abodes, which are to be cultivated toward all sentient beings. Loving kindness, 1, loving kindness, 2, compassion, 3, empathic joy, 4, equanimity. And he recommends a book here called Loving Kindness, The Revolutionary Art of Happiness by Sharon Salzberg, or Training the Mind by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. I give some basic instructions for the Brahma Viharas toward the end of this book. Those familiar with cognitive restructuring will notice great similarities between this approximately 2,500-year-old approach and more contemporary techniques. These can help develop morality and attenuate the hindrances that cause distraction and poor concentration, as well as begin to create better mental and personal habits. However, this can have its problems if not understood in a realistic and clear way. A subtle but incorrect modification of these techniques can create significant internal conflict, as can failing to understand the limitations of such techniques. The subtle modification that is not recommended but all too common is the following: the meditator substitutes feelings, is the following. The meditator substitutes feelings of self-judgment or self-loathing for the thoughts they feel are unskillful. This results from only seeing the ignorant side and not the compassion side of intentions and thoughts. It can produce some extremely detrimental results, as well as highly neurotic and repressed individuals who are in basic denial of their actual humanity and heart. It can produce meditators who are quite testy, bitter, tight, judgmental, puritanical, deeply depressed, prone to bullying, and generally unpleasant to be around. This is one extreme. The other extreme tends to come when people only focus on the compassion side of their emotions and not the confusion and suffering that can be mixed with them. Aspects of the late 1960s come to mind. This error can lead to extreme misunderstandings and distortions of Tantra and Tantric teachings, unhealthy Epicureanism, addictions, and general debauchery that are simply destructive of self and others. While this may seem all fun and free for a while, the consequences tend to be as bad or worse as can be expected from behavior that dismisses the most elementary aspects of causality. Thus, a sophisticated examination of our heart's desires, aversions, and confusions can help sort out what aspects of these are skillful and worth cultivating, and what aspects are unhelpful and worth abandoning by the various available methods. The last problem comes from not understanding that the only way to bring some lasting relief from persistent and sometimes uncontrollable thoughts is to become awakened. Until this happens, even in the early stages of awakening, the poor perception of various difficult patterns of emotions will continue to produce all kinds of unhelpful thoughts and mind noise that are easy to get duped by and snagged in. Thus, while training in thought restraint can be very helpful and is highly recommended, it should not be viewed as being more powerful than it is. Remember that training in morality and concentration does not produce awakening without training in insight. This point is mentioned again and again, but somehow continues to be overlooked. A useful analogy is that of the Augean stables. The story goes that one of Hercules' tasks was to clean the Augean stables. These housed a very large number of cattle that continually produced great heaping mounds of dung. He tried again and again with superhuman strength to remove them, but there were too many cattle producing too much poop too fast for even Hercules to keep up. As soon as he had cleaned one area, the other areas became piled high with manure, and so he despaired. However, when he diverted a great river through the stables, it flushed clean the whole of the stables at once, and his task was accomplished. While the sensations that make up our reality are still misunderstood, we can feel a bit like Hercules before he diverted the river. This is par for the course and perfectly normal. Awakening itself is a sudden occurrence, but the cultivation that leads to that initial awakening is gradual and proceeds in relatively predictable stages, detailed in Part 5. For more information on this topic, I recommend the excellent works of Chinul, Chinul, presented in Tracing Back the Radiance, as translated by Robert Buswell. At each progressive stage, certain unhelpful patterns of identifying with experience are forever eliminated or overcome. Sort of like channeling a river through one part of the stables, but many more remain until awakening. Thus, the mind becomes progressively clearer, more spacious, more still, and those unskillful thoughts and other sensations that we do still subtly identify with and that do still arise are more likely to be caught and monitored before they can do damage. Thus, Those who wish for the end of suffering should strive to be kind, or at least deeply non-harming, to stabilize the mind and to carefully and precisely understand the actual truth of their experience in each moment in a way that goes beyond content. And that is the end of chapter 23. And chapter 24 is called From Content to Insight. And we will start that tomorrow when we resume. Thanks for tuning in today. Have a great